Eye on Gauteng, brought to you by the Gauteng Department of Economic Development.
The Gauteng province is South Africa's smallest, most densely populated province, and yet is its most economically significant. It has a role to play in the future prosperity of not only all South Africans, but those outside its borders as well. It is the economic heartland of the region, and today on the show we look at the long-term planning for a shared, prosperous and sustainable future. The 2055 discussion document was launched in Johannesburg last week by Gauteng Premier Nomvula Mokonyane. Let's have a look.
Home to what was previously the largest of Newtown's 3 steam-driven power stations, Turbine Hall was the place where the Gauteng provincial government launched their Gauteng Vision 2055 discussion document, a developmental plan for South Africa's top-performing province, Gauteng.
Vision 2055 seeks to bring the ideas, the dreams, the aspirations of all residents of Gauteng, including the entire country, together as to what kind of Gauteng do we want to see by 2055. As we build, as continue to build now, what exactly do we want to have in terms of the kind of nation we want to belong to, the kind of infrastructure we need, the kind of values we aspire for, the kind of economy we want for Gauteng, and most importantly, how do we contribute to a prosperous South Africa as Gauteng.
The uniqueness about this plan is that Gauteng citizens themselves will also have a role to play in shaping the kind of province that they would like to live in.
In as much as we have the Gauteng Advisory Council and the various institutions of higher learning and so forth, and various experts, it will not actually be correct for us to think long term without those that we are planning for. And it is on those bases that we've learned from how the Freedom Charter as a plan was actually developed, that it is good that you go into individuals, you go to organizations, you go to opinion makers, you give everybody a platform, and you make sure that every contribution is made into one message that everybody can say, this is where we are all going to.
Junior Mayor of Johannesburg, James Pierce, was positive about the government's decision to include the public.
I'm all for it completely. I don't think that any change can really be made unless the people are behind it. After all, it's not like the government can do anything. They're just representing us. If we aren't doing anything, what can they represent?
How does the Gauteng government plan to keep the momentum going until the year 2055?
Part of what we have already started to do is to bring different individuals who constitute the Gauteng Advisory Council that advises the Premier under the Planning Commission. And they are actually using different means of research, their own experience, their knowledge, the different sectors that are there, and would also be using the media, will be going to community-based organizations, would be using various means, will be reaching out to our youth, who are quite important because this is about their future and the time when they will be leaders of this province.
But what kind of change would the youth like to see?
So many people say stuff like poverty and crime, and I do want to see those things changed. But the fact is that those will always be with us. First world countries struggle with that even today. So more than anything, I'd like a change in the attitude of people. I'd like people to not always be saying and complaining about other things, but saying, what can I do? If we had a unified front, then that is where real change will happen. If the people of South Africa stand up and say, this is our country, and we're going to take it back.
With the youth as a driving force, the Gauteng Vision 2055 could see a fresher, transformed Gauteng province in the coming years.
Now joining us in studio to unpack the Gauteng 2055 plan is head of the Gauteng Planning Commission, Mr. Rashid Seedat, the head of research of the Gauteng City Region Observatory, Graeme Gotz, and the Gauteng Chairperson of the National Youth Development Agency, Mr. Simon Molefe. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us and welcome to Eye on Gauteng.
Thank you. Thank you.
I want to start with you, Rashid. The Gauteng Planning Commission, we have a National Planning Commission, and since 2009, South African government has been making a lot of noise about planning commissions. I'm really fascinated, and I'm sure the viewers are too, to understand what does the Gauteng Planning Commission do in the context of the National Planning Commission?
Well, The National Planning Commission basically is an umbrella body for the entire country. We are homing in specifically on the Gauteng City Region area and basically doing more detailed planning. So while the overarching plan that the National Planning Commission is developing, we take that as our umbrella plan, we are kind of filling in the detail down to the Gauteng level.
Okay. Now, in your answer, you spoke about the Gauteng City Region. Before we run away with ourselves, I see everybody's got a copy of the document, and we'll be referring to this document, and that's what we're here to discuss. Graeme, the Gauteng City Region that we hear quite a lot throughout, we're going to be hearing quite a lot throughout this program. What are we talking about when we say the Gauteng City Region?
Sure. I always say it's basically two things. It's a space, a very important space within the national space economy and the world, if you like, and it's an aspiration. It's an ideal. So there's something that isn't physical about it. It's something which is looking to the future and saying something about the kind of place we want to become. So spatially, what is it? It's basically the towns and cities that make up Gauteng, that are inside Gauteng and sit outside Gauteng. 2% of the land mass of the country. If you just look at Gauteng, it's 34% of the national economy. And if you take a wider area, it contributes about 43% of the national economy. And represents about a quarter of the population of the country. So it's a really, really important space. The thing about a city region is that, and the idea of a Gauteng city region is not just what we see at the moment, there's also an ideal to it. The notion that this place is governed by different parts, in its different parts by different municipalities, different sections of government. The question is, how do we pull all those things together, all those different parts of government together, in order to make the whole work more coherently, so that we can become more competitive internationally, more inclusive internally, and more sustainable for the long run.
Okay, let's bring Simon in here. Simon, you're the Gauteng Chairperson for the National Youth Development Agency. Now, the Gauteng City Region, as the economic heartland of South Africa, Graeme has made it quite clear, 34% of the national GDP is generated within this region. If you go further, as he explained, 43%. So it's an important geographical space. In your interactions as the National Youth Development Agency representative, what is your opinion of the importance of Gauteng as an economic region?
Well, I think the importance of Gauteng as an economic region, you will know that generally all young people, even including in SADC, even in our own provinces in the country, all of them in terms of opportunities, they look solutions in Gauteng. Most of the major universities are in our province. The international airport of the country is in our province. So the Gauteng is the hub of everything. So it's important that Gauteng in its planning integrate its future so that you don't have a problem with the generation, because the generations must be able to be prepared and be able to be integrated in the system. So and therefore it's important that Gauteng as the center of Africa, it's more reorganized and it's be able to be integrated. And I'm sure you'll know that young people generally, as they come from SADC, from other African countries, as they arrive in Johannesburg. And therefore, if Johannesburg does not speak to their integration, then how does it relate with the youth in the province and the economy? Because we should be able to say how to integrate the youth in the economy in our province. And that's why it's important that we must strive to have partnership with all stakeholders, the private sector, government, at the center of saying what do we want to see as a Gauteng in the next in 2055, and that's why it's important.
So that's the golden year, 2055. I want to bring Rashid in here. We spoke a little bit about the economic output of the Gauteng province, how significant it is. Everybody's dreams, we all hear about the Jimmy comes to Joburg. They come to Joburg, and this is where they want to start their dreams. The aspirations of people in Gauteng. How important is it from a planning point of view that Gauteng reaches, it remains that, first of all, the El Dorado, and going forward becomes sustainable?
Well, I think Gauteng, ever since the discovery of gold, became the most important sort of urban center in the country. I mean, before that, it used to be Cape Town. But within 10 years of the discovery of gold in 1886, I mean, Johannesburg became the largest city in the country, and has remained so as the sort of key economic node. I think that we certainly intend to keep it so, and I think that obviously we need to have balanced development across the country, and some of the work that's currently happening by the National Planning Commission and the Minister of Economic Development and the infrastructure work at national level is beginning to focus on other parts of the country. So the Waterberg, how do we use our mineral resources more effectively, and so on, so that we have balanced growth across the country, but at the same time, the unique role played by Gauteng in the national space economy, or even certainly in the SADC context as well. I think
that's very fascinating.
A critical kind of issue. So, I mean, we right here in Sandton. I mean, Sandton is the financial and business services hub of this part of the world. It plays a critical role in providing accounting services, advertising, legal services, the stock exchange, so access to financial markets and so on. It's playing that kind of role, and development in the rest of the country. If we're exploiting mineral resources, for example, in Limpopo, surely that has an impact on what happens here, because those companies are basically, often their corporate headquarters are in Johannesburg, and so on. So I think that what we're saying for the future is that we want to retain this position, but not at the expense of anyone. We want to ensure balanced growth across the country on the one hand, but at the same time retain our preeminent position. Much like, I mean, you're talking about on a comparative basis, cities that have a key role in the sort of in the space economy, like New York and London, Paris, Tokyo, and so on. I mean, the role they play is they kind of provide the space for corporate headquarters, the stock exchange, financial markets, and so on. And I think that's kind of role that we want Gauteng to retain into the future.
Fantastic. It looks like it's going to be really exciting going forward. Graeme, I want to bring you in here. The kind of work that you do at the Gauteng City Region Observatory is to observe trends. And we're talking scenario planning, we're talking long-term planning, but let's look at what's going on right now. Sure. South Africa is one of the most unequal societies in the world. We have the largest Gini coefficient in the world. And this is something that obviously has to change looking at 2055. Exactly. But just give us a picture of just how bad the situation is right now, and so that we can have an idea of how much work is ahead of us.
Yeah, I think there's both positive and negatives to the Gauteng story. I mean, I think if you look at what's happened over the last 15 years, there's been an extraordinary amount of development in this particular province. The discussion document tries in facts and figures to capture some of that progress. Just in terms of the record of the number of new service delivery connections that have been made, or the number of households that have benefited from formal housing, there's a very positive story. But I think the key thing is that there's a long way to go. Crime, poverty, inequality, lack of access to economic opportunities.
I mean, what Simon wants to add a word, just how bad things are.
So I think the key painful part it's whether those who have to play a role play in their part, because the issue on the inequality of the society, in particular on the economic, have an impact on the future, because it also affects the social cohesion of the society. Because if we have to do the qualification of the social cohesion where we are, economic sector have a very serious impact if it's not attended to. And that's why I'm sure Graeme, in part of their programs, was to find solutions so that it doesn't affect the future of the province.
I was perusing the document, Graeme, and I saw a very interesting sentence, and it said that there are some places in Gauteng, some people in Gauteng, whose standard of living is, far surpasses even that of first world countries. Absolutely. I mean, that is unsustainable. Absolutely. And at the same time, there's people in abject poverty.
Well, it's unsustainable in the sense that you've got a large body of the population which doesn't have access to the same quality of life. I mean, it's something that we would want to aspire to, that everyone has the same quality of life, while obviously dealing with some of the negative implications of that. I mean, one of the big questions that we're facing in this province as in many other parts of the world, is how can we sustain higher quality of life? Everyone has access to services, a nice house, access to mobility, transport, etc., but the effect that has on the environment, on the limited resources that we have, we are in a resource crisis, and we have to deal with that. So
right,
quality of life, but address some of the negatives of that.
Just to come in here, Lionel, I remember when Joe Slovo returned from exile around obviously it would have been 1990, and he made this comment. He said, as they were flying into the country, they saw these, the white suburbs, basically with a neat house and a big swimming pool in every house, and then they passed over places like Tembisa, and they saw the little shacks and the small houses and so on, and that's really the point, is that we don't want every house to have a swimming pool, because that's actually unsustainable. And so we need to, of course, the quality of life needs to be equitable, but not in an unsustainable way. And even the use of energy, for example. When the historically white suburbs were developed, there was never this energy crisis that we're facing now. Okay, at that time, electricity was plentiful and cheap. No longer the case, and because we understand the externalities of the cost of coal-fired power stations, for example. So, how do we move towards a sustainable future? It's not just an equal future.
On that thought, just hold that thought, because I know there is a plan. The plan is going to take us up to 2055. We'll talk more about the plan and focus on the solutions when we come back after the break.